The Germans had designed Stalag Luft III to be escape-proof. Machine gun towers every 100 yards, barbed wire with overhangs that made scaling impossible. Even the soil worked against prisoners, bright yellow sand that would expose any digging attempt. Still, Roger Bushell had a plan. 600 prisoners would escape through 3 tunnels over 300 feet long and 30 feet deep. They had lights and wooden railways and even a clever way of disposing of the sand. But in February 1944, Commandant Von Lindeiner had worse news for his Allied prisoners. The rules had changed and the warning was blunt. It is not worth it, gentlemen. Escapers may suffer harsh consequences. Everyone understood. Whether they failed or succeeded, no one would see the inside of a cell again. Roger Bushell listened, then shook his head. We go. March 24th, new moon. By 1942, the constant air raids over Germany were turning into something much darker and horrifying than the sorties of the early days of the war. British warplanes were no longer just bombing strategic locations and military posts. They were targeting large population centers just as the Germans had done during the Blitz. As the bombings began to take their toll on the German population, being shot down behind enemy lines went from a perilous ordeal to literal hell for British pilots. Flight Lieutenant Nathaniel Flexer remembers, "I met RAF prisoners who were shot down while on bombing missions over Germany. They were attacked by angry civilians, brutally interrogated by the Gestapo, and packed into cattle cars." Making it to a POW camp was almost a privilege now. Still, as soon as most Allied pilots were thrown into one, they seized any opportunity to escape and make their way back home, even if it meant walking for thousands of miles in a country where being spotted could mean their end. But Stalag Luft III wasn't built for easy escapes. The Germans had learned from their mistakes. They cut the camp from a dense pine forest 100 miles southeast of Berlin, surrounded by flat farmland that offered no cover for fleeing prisoners. Winter temperatures dropped well below zero. The barbed wire fences had overhangs that made scaling impossible, backed by machine gun towers every 100 yards. Most diabolical of all was the soil itself. Beneath the dark topsoil lay bright yellow sand that would glow brightly against any garden or pathway. Trying to tunnel out would leave evidence behind that was impossible to hide. The camp's commandant, Colonel Friedrich Wilhelm von Lindeiner Wildau, was no Nazi fanatic, just a World War I veteran who'd won 2 Iron Crosses and wanted to finish his career quietly. He treated the prisoners fairly, within the Geneva Convention's bounds, but he wasn't naive. These were RAF airmen, notorious for escaping. When Bushell arrived in October 1942, von Lindeiner recognized danger immediately. Here was a man with nothing left to lose, a squadron leader who'd escaped twice and had a fire in his eyes that interrogation couldn't extinguish. Big X, the prisoners called him. In just a few days, he was already treated as a leader. Bushell's idea was nothing fancy, but complex enough to give them options if one of their schemes was discovered. They would dig 3 tunnels, all going in different directions. If everything went according to plan on the night of the escape, the 3 tunnels would be able to take 200 men out in mere hours. If something went wrong and a tunnel was discovered, they might be able to keep the other 2 secret. They named the tunnels Tom, Dick, and Harry. Bushell explained, "Tom heads west from Hut 123 toward the woods. Dick goes south from 122's washroom. Harry runs north from under the stove in 104. Canadian Flight Lieutenant Wally Floody, a mining engineer before the war, did the calculations. Each tunnel would need to be 30 feet deep to avoid German sound detection equipment, over 300 feet long to clear the wire and reach the cover. They'd have to move hundreds of tons of earth, grain by grain, without the ferrets, what they called German guards, whose sole job was detecting escape attempts, noticing anything unusual. The work began in April 1943. Men descended into shafts so narrow they had to dig naked. The air was suffocating 30 feet underground. Wooden trolleys hauled dirt back along makeshift railways built from stolen bedboards. Every few hours, diggers collapsed from oxygen deprivation and had to be dragged unconscious to the surface. Above ground, the sand disposal problem seemed impossible. Hundreds of tons of bright yellow earth had to vanish without a trace. Peter Fanshawe solved it with underwear and string. The prisoners cut the legs off woolen long johns, tied the ends shut, and rigged them with drawstrings that hung down inside their trouser legs. Fill the bags with sand, walk casually around the compound, then pull the string to release steady streams into garden plots where dark soil could hide the evidence. They called themselves penguins because of their stiff-legged waddle. Hundreds of men shuffled around Stalag Luft III daily, sand pouring invisibly from their pants while they chatted with guards about the weather. The German ferrets weren't fools. Corporal Karl Grieser, nicknamed Rubberneck for his habit of craning into every corner, knew something was happening. Staff Sergeant Hermann Glemnitz, called Dimwits with bitter affection, was methodical, patient, observant, and absolutely dedicated to his job. But the prisoners had their own intelligence network. George Harsh, head of internal security, instituted the duty pilot system. Every German entering the compound was logged and tracked. Complex hand signals flashed between lookouts, warning tunnel crews when ferrets approached. The system never failed. By the summer of 1943, Tom stretched 260 feet toward the woods. Dick was 150 feet and growing. Harry inched north at a foot per day, reinforced with stolen bedboards and lit by electrical wire siphoned from the camp's power grid. Then disaster struck. One penguin got careless on a bright June morning. Yellow sand spilled from his trouser leg onto a pathway, glinting like gold in the sunlight. Hermann Glemnitz spotted it during his routine patrol. The German sergeant's blood turned to ice. He knew that color, knew what it meant. Within minutes, German engineers were pouring explosive charges and detection equipment into the compound. Tom was blown into oblivion. 18 months of backbreaking labor vanished in smoke and thunder as the Germans collapsed the tunnel and sealed it shut. Bushell watched from his hut window as soldiers emerged from the destroyed shaft, yellow sand coating their uniforms like evidence of the prisoners' defiance. His face showed nothing, but inside, the hatred burned hotter. He ordered the X-organization to lie low. For 2 months, the digging stopped. Then came worse news. The Americans were being transferred to their own compound. Half the workforce would be gone. Time was running out. Winter 1944 brought horrors beyond the biting cold for Allied prisoners. In February, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel decreed that escaped officers must be turned into the Gestapo, marking a shift from prior adherence to the Geneva Conventions. This ominous policy escalated in March with the Bullet Order, mandating that recaptured POWs, particularly those who'd tried to flee, be sent to concentration camps for execution. These orders signaled Nazi Germany's growing desperation and disregard for international wartime norms. Colonel von Lindeiner assembled the senior Allied officers in his office. "It is not worth it, gentlemen. The public temper outside is running very high against the Allied air forces. Escapers may suffer harsh consequences. The war may be over in a year or two. It is not worth taking unnecessary risks now. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what harsh consequences meant. Bushell shook his head. It was his duty as a British officer to escape. We go, March 24th, new moon. By then, Harry stretched 348 feet through the frozen earth, deeper than a three-story building and longer than a football field. The tunnel had electric lighting, wooden railway trolleys, and a ventilation system made from hundreds of tin cans hammered flat and connected like mechanical lungs. Over 600 prisoners had contributed to the effort. Fewer than 200 could escape through Harry. A lottery was drawn. The first 30 spots went to men with the best chance of reaching Allied lines. Those who spoke German, had forged papers, and knew the territory. The next 170 were determined by luck. Bushell paired himself with Lieutenant Bernard Scheithauer, a young French officer. Both men knew they would not survive, but neither hesitated. On the night of March 24th, 1944, there was no moon. The perfect time for vanishing. At 8:40 p.m., the first escapers crawled through the trapdoor beneath the stove in Hut 104. Johnny Bull led the way up the exit shaft, breaking through the final 18 inches of frozen earth with his bare hands. When he poked his head above ground, his whispered curse echoed down the tunnel. They had made a mistake. Harry was short. Instead of emerging in the woods, the tunnel ended in open ground, 20 yards from the tree line. Practically in the lap of the guard towers. Bushell closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds, feeling the weight of 600 men's hopes settling on his shoulders. Then he opened them and began improvising. He came up with a rope system that would go down the shaft. 2 tugs meant clear. Otherwise, they had to wait. Once outside, they would have to belly crawl to the trees and pray for the best. It was 10:30 p.m., 90 minutes behind schedule. Then, the air raid sirens began wailing across the compound. The power was cut. The lights went out throughout the tunnel. Dozens of men were trapped 30 feet underground, breathing stale air that tasted of fear and desperation. Trolleys derailed in the darkness. Sand cascaded from damaged roof supports. Suitcases jammed in the narrow shaft. Some men panicked in the suffocating blackness and had to be dragged back toward the entrance. Outside, those who'd already made it through scattered into the German night. Bob van der Stock, escaper number 18, walked boldly to Sagan railway station during the air raid. When a German soldier stopped him, van der Stock claimed to be a Dutch foreign worker. The soldier directed him to the bomb shelter. By 4:55 a.m., only 87 men had escaped instead of the planned 200. Dawn was breaking across the frozen landscape, painting the sky red. Time was up. New Zealander Mick Shand lay face down in the snow beside the tunnel exit, waiting for his signal. The rope in his hand would tell him when the coast was clear for the final sprint to the tree line. The German guard walking his patrol route had inexplicably deviated from his path. Boots crunched through the snow, coming straight toward the hole. Shand pressed his face deeper into the frozen ground, trying to become invisible. The footsteps stopped. 1 foot from the tunnel entrance. In the tree line, Lawrence Revel Carter watched through the grey pre-dawn light as the German guard unslung his rifle. The barrel swung toward Shand's motionless form. Revel Carter had a choice: stay hidden and leave Shand to his fate, or reveal himself and doom them both. He burst from the trees, arms raised, shouting the first German words that came to mind. "Nicht schießen! Don't shoot!" The rifle cracked once, wildly, as Shand rolled toward cover. The game was up. Inside the tunnel, Men heard the shot and scrambled back toward Hut 104. Identity papers were torn apart and swallowed. Emergency rations were devoured. The trapdoor slammed shut just as German boots began thundering across the compound. Within hours, a Grossfahndung, the highest level of national alert, went out across Germany. Wehrmacht troops, local police, Gestapo units, and Home Guard formations joined the manhunt. 5 million Germans were looking for 76 escaped Allied airmen. Adolf Hitler, informed of the mass breakout that morning, flew into a rage. He demanded that all escapers be shot on sight. Heinrich Himmler convinced the Führer to be more selective. The number 50 was chosen enough to send a message, but perhaps not enough to be seen as a war crime. Over the following 3 weeks, escapers were recaptured across Germany and occupied Europe, in remote forests, beside country roads, in train stations, and in safe houses. The Gestapo collected them one by one. All reports read the same: shot while attempting to escape. Roger Bushell and Bernhard Scheidhauer made it 500 miles before they were caught near the Czech border. A Gestapo car picked them up on a country road outside Breslau. Per Bergsland and Jens Müller reached Sweden and freedom. Bram van der Stok reached Gibraltar. 73 others were recaptured. 3 weeks after the breakout, the new camp commandant, Colonel Franz Brauner, summoned the senior British officer. His words were delivered with mechanical precision. 41 of the escaped prisoners have been shot while attempting to evade recapture. The officer asked how many had been wounded. None. The number would eventually rise to 50. The war ended 14 months later. By then, most of the men who dug Harry lay in unmarked graves across Germany, but their tunnel had become a legend. It did not get any of the 200 men home, nor was it militarily decisive in any way, but 76 Allied airmen had crawled through 348 feet of German earth toward freedom, proving that courage could triumph over concrete and wire and the certainty of doom. The bright yellow sand that had threatened to expose them became their monument, evidence of resistance that could never quite be buried, no matter how deep the Germans tried to hide it.